All right, so we just finished listening to the radio interview about racism between Gus Renegade. It's Gus Renegade's show, and he was interviewing Sifu Freddie Lee and Amatodai of Freddie's Modern Kung Fu. So we listened to the whole thing, and the interview ended badly, where with some of the questioning by Gus really was suggesting that Freddie has some issues with racism himself. Freddie got offended by that and decided to end the interview, and then there was like maybe 20 minutes of Gus's audience continuing to talk about Freddie. So in any case, we just finished listening to it. You know, we were kind of surprised at the miscommunications and stuff that were going on, and we just want to put our feedback out there. You know what we heard. So this is Adrian, and I don't know. What did you think about the interview?
Well, I felt that the clip at the end that Gus played of Freddie's video, and he was talking about the basketball player that went to Harvard, and
Jeremy Lin, I think,
and how well educated he was, and that he got his education and then went on to the NBA. And then he compared him to other NBA players, said LeBron James and Michael Jordan and a few others. Anyway, it sounded to me like Gus was assuming actually that video was about race. And that's what it sounded like to me, like he was making that assumption. And a lot of it as well sounded to me like he was putting words in Freddie's mouth. Words that Freddie never said. He was saying things like he kept saying through the end of the video, or through the end of the podcast, he was saying, "Oh well, I'm sure Freddie was going to say dumb gorilla," but it didn't sound to me like Freddie was going to say that at all. And it just sounded to me like listening to Freddie's speech patterns. I have listened to them a lot because Freddie talks frequently with Ryan over Skype and that. And they talk on the phone a lot. They're in contact, I think, almost every day.
Pretty close.
So I've heard Freddie speak a lot, and even just watching Freddie's videos, I've watched a lot of Freddie's videos, and if you're watching them, you would have heard that the part that Gus was talking about, you would have heard it as just part of Freddie's speech pattern. It's that sound to me. It's like somebody saying or like all the time when they're speaking, when they're trying to think of the next word to say and they're stumbling over their words. Freddie seems to get overexcited, I'd say, when he's doing his YouTube videos, and he starts speaking very quickly. And it sounds to me like he starts stumbling over his words because he's speaking so quickly and getting so, I guess, hot-headed in some of his videos. And so he'll say stuff and it'll sound like it's like the beginning of a word, but it's not. It's like he's stumbling over his words, and instead of saying like a lot of people would say, he makes sounds, which I have noticed him do when he speaks. And even in his YouTube videos, if you just watched his YouTube videos, you would hear those kinds of things when Freddie's talking, that he starts getting overexcited about whatever he's talking about, and he starts stumbling, and he might say "gur" or "ga" or "ch" even, and it doesn't mean that he's trying to say a word. To me, it sounds like he's stumbling over his words because he's speaking too fast. But it sounded to me like Gus really took it as Freddie was really trying to say something racist when he wasn't. It didn't sound to me like it was racist at all. The video didn't sound racist at all to me.
Yeah, I don't know. Like to me, I think there was a lot more made out of that video in terms of it being racist than it really was. Like at the very beginning of the video, Freddie does mention that the Jeremy is Chinese, but he was doing that in the context of saying, well, I don't know a whole lot about this guy, but this is what I know. And he went through kind of a little short list of what he knows, and I know he's Chinese. That was the only time he ever mentioned any kind of race category at all. And then he went through, talking about his achievements. And from knowing Freddie and listening to a lot of his thoughts over the years, I know what he was saying. He was promoting, this guy is a representative of a well-balanced human being, because Freddie thinks about this split of mind, body, spirit, and he was saying so much of the focus in sports, and it goes across the board with a lot of the sports, is totally on the body and leaves out the mind and the spirit. And this is one of the issues he has with MMA too. But I think that was the argument he was trying to make was okay, here's a guy who's a really good representative of the balanced human being, rather than these guys that are totally all physical. And when he brought up, LeBron James and Michael Jordan and stuff, is because these are the big names in the NBA, and that's when people think of NBA, these are the people that they think of. And so, yeah, to me, he wasn't bringing them up just because they were black in particular, and he wasn't trying to portray black people as being not intellectual in comparison to Chinese or anything like that. I think more was made of that than was actually there in what Freddie was trying to express. Whether or not he was going to talk about we don't need dumb gorillas or not, that's a common colloquial that's been around for a long time. Yeah, sometimes it's associated with racist stuff, sometimes it's not. Sometimes people talk about any, dumb jock kind of guy as a dumb gorilla. And so it doesn't matter what the race. So if Freddie, in that, even in that clip, in catching himself, if that's what he did, he's showing, oh, maybe if I say this, people are going to think that it's a racist thing, and he caught it and retracted and decided to say dumb fucks instead. But yeah, in any case, my reading of that video was not that it was Freddie's video was not that it was overly racist. My reading of this Gus Renegade's approach was that he's like hypersensitive to racism, where he's calling it where it might not even exist. And I took issue, like at the beginning of the interview, there was a segment where he asked Freddie whether basically whether anybody can be a racist, and Freddie says yeah, and then he was asked to give his interpretation or his definition of what is racism, and Freddie's definition of racism was, anytime you have a situation where somebody is feeling superior over somebody else based specifically on their race, then that's an instance of racism. And Gus's definition is drastically different from that, which was that it's more a systemic thing where there's a white supremacy system in place, and so only white people can be racist.
Yeah, I gotta say something about that, because where we live in Canada, in our province, the city that we live in at one time was considered the most racist city in all of our province. And our province is quite large. We live in the province of Alberta. And our city at one time was considered the most racist city in all of Alberta. And at an earlier time, it was considered the most racist city in all of Canada. And this is something that I lived through since I was a little kid, because I've grown up in this city. And I myself am Blackfoot, and I've lived here my entire life. And I'm also partly Cree, because my mother comes from the Crees and my dad is Blackfoot. So I can tell you right now that racism is not just white people being racist against other races. Racism comes from all sides. I've had to deal with it my entire life. I've had people from my own tribe be racist towards me because my mom is Cree. And they've called me down and told me I'm not good enough because I'm part Cree. And then I've had Cree people do the same thing, tell me I'm not good enough because I'm part Blackfoot. And then outside of that, I've also had not just white people, but people of all colors come to me and say that, make racist statements towards me just because I'm Native. And not just that, but because I'm brown, even. They don't even know what nationality I am, but they assume that I'm of a certain nationality as soon as they look at me. I mean, I've been accused of being lazy Mexican, and I'm not Mexican. I've never been to Mexico. There's no descent in my family anywhere from Mexico. I've been accused of being Japanese, and that I was, a stupid Japanese person. I'm not Japanese, obviously. I've been accused of being from India as well, and told, and the slur here, I don't know about other places, but the slur here for people from India is they call them a Paki. And so I've had people call me that because they don't know what I am in terms of race. And I've told them I'm not from India, I'm not from Japan, I'm not from Mexico, I'm Canadian, and I'm Blackfoot. And I have Cree ancestry as well, because my mother is Cree. But I grew up identifying mostly as being Blackfoot because I grew up in Blackfoot territory. And so I would never say that racism is only white people. I've seen racism from all sides, and especially since I chose to marry a white man, I get racism for that as well. And I've seen racism perpetrated against him as well. People that are Native will call him down because he's not Native, which to me is really ridiculous. And then they try and claim that they're not racist, but yet they are making racial slurs against him. And I've seen people of other nationalities make racial slurs against, I've seen people from India, which there is a large community here that is from India. I've seen people from India make racial slurs against white people, natives, black people, which we have a moderate black community here, and these are people that immigrated from Africa that came into our community. And I've seen, people, we also have a very large Asian community here, and I've seen Asian people be racist against against black people, against Indian people, against natives, against white people. I've seen it from all sides, and so I would never say that racism is only a white problem. Racism is a problem everywhere, no matter what color you are. You're going to get racism, and it's how you deal with it. And being overly sensitive and implying that there's racism on something where there clearly isn't, I mean, you really have to, I guess, you have to learn how to be more objective of what you're looking at. You can't just assume right away that everybody is racist. And to me, that's what it looks like Gus was doing, was just assuming right away that anybody that's not black is racist. That's what it looked like to me. That's what it sounded like to me. And that what Freddie was talking about in his video, to me it sounded like it had nothing to do with race, other than saying that the one guy was Chinese.
Well, that wasn't even a racist remark.
No.
I mean, what Freddie was doing was just contextualizing.
Yeah.
What does he know about this guy?
Yeah.
And the whole reason for Freddie doing the video in the first place was because somebody asked him in a comment on the YouTube channel, well, what do you think about so and so? And so we get a lot of that on I moderate the FMK YouTube channel. We get a lot of those requests. What do you think about Jet Li, and what do you think about Chuck Norris, and what do you think about Michael Jordan? And people ask these questions because they know Freddie will do a video and answer, and give his thoughts on them. So when he starts talking at the beginning of that video, he's contextualizing, and Freddie knows that the reason that somebody asked him about this particular NBA player is probably because the guy is Chinese. So he includes that in the contextualization. I understand, I can appreciate the discourse about the systemic racism. It's obvious that really, when it comes down to it, the system is run by white people. The overarching system is white controlled, and that is problematic. But I think if we're going to talk about this, what is this concept racism? How can you apply it? Either you got to apply it to the system and talk about the system being racist, which it is, or if you're gonna apply it to people, then you got to open up that category to be available to anybody. Because if anybody can do something racist, if one person can do something racist, anybody from any race can do that kind of racist act. If racism requires that you have a power imbalance, still, for instance, I work in a tribal college, and there's been times working in the tribal college where I have felt that my job is threatened, that my position is threatened because I'm white. And that is a power imbalance, see, where because I'm in the Native community, and in the Native community it's run by the tribe, I'm the minority there, and in that case there's a power imbalance, and there has been people that have tried to move politically with the tribal council to try to get me fired because I'm white from my job. To me, that's racism. So
Yeah.
you can have racism go in any direction.
Well, talking about that as well, yes, Derek, what I've seen is people will not have a specific complaint about you specifically. It's, well, Ryan's white. He shouldn't be working here because he's white.
Right.
It has nothing to do with your education. It has nothing to do with your knowledge. It has nothing to do with your lifestyle. It's just because of the color of your skin. And that's usually their whole argument that I've seen. And we've been together now 17 years. And in that 17 years, the most argument that I've ever heard against Ryan is that he's white. And it's just, why is this white guy teaching at our school? Why is this white guy allowed to marry one of our women?
Right.
Why is this white guy doing this or that? It's never, does he have the right to do that? Does he have the knowledge? They never ask that. Does he have an education? They never ask that. Ryan has a bachelor's degree from the University of Boston, and he's got a master's degree from the University of Lethbridge, and he got his PhD from the Red Crow College. And so Ryan is one of the most educated people I know. And you know, he had to work hard to get those degrees. You know, I've never met anyone that has worked harder. I'm like really serious. Out of everybody I've ever met in my life, I've never met anyone that works harder than Ryan. And yet, still, it doesn't matter how educated he is. It doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter what he knows. It's the fact that he's white. And that's why people don't like him.
Some people.
And, well, yeah, some people. That's the thing. That's the overwhelming argument over Ryan's white.
Yeah.
And that's
some people are like that, but luckily it's not everybody. Because I do get to, you know, I am employed with the tribe. I have had my job for over a decade. You know, we do get to do things like, you know, we're heavily involved in Blackfoot ceremony, and I wasn't blocked from doing that because there are people that aren't like that. And the thing is, Freddie Lee is one of these people that's not like that. He's not a racist. He's open to everybody and he treats people, as individuals. He looks at them as individuals. He doesn't look at them as colors. And so, you know, here in Gus, although, you know, yeah, you were asking him, did I ever say, Mr. Lee, you're a racist? No, you never said that, but
it was heavily implied.
It was heavily implied, yeah.
Yes, heavily implied. And then you continued to allow your colors to be racist towards Freddie. And, I mean, the one that really comes back to me is the one guy that was arguing about meditation. And Freddie asked him, well, what is your definition of meditation? And the guy refused to answer. And it was obvious that he didn't understand what meditation is. And he obviously didn't even know what he was talking about, but yet he's, you know, making racist remarks towards Freddie. And Freddie just asked him one simple question, and the guy couldn't answer it because he didn't even know what he was talking about.
Yeah, well, there was two guys that talked about the meditation. That first guy that brought it up, Freddie asked him, you know, what's your definition of meditation? Because meditation is just being in the moment, being right now. You know, the reason I think that Freddie said he's not interested in reading the book that was suggested, because that book is about being somewhere else than right now. You know, Freddie does read texts, like spiritual texts and stuff, that are teaching him how to be further in meditation and such. But he's not going to sit with a book that dwells upon such a negative aspect of life, and that would you know, maybe influence him toward being hypersensitive to things that aren't really about the now. They're about you know, all this past racist experience built up or what have you, past experiences with racism built up and what have you, so that you're misjudging what's occurring in the now. That's anti-meditation. So yeah, you know, that guy commented, that guy wasn't going to talk about, or wasn't going to go there trying to define what racism or what meditation was. even though he was talking down about it to Freddie, another guy came on subsequently, maybe 2 callers later, and said, you know, this is what Asian people are always doing. They turn to meditation and this instead of dealing with the racism. You know, again, that right there is a racist remark. Did Gus defend his guest? Not at all. He just says, Freddie, do you have anything to comment about this? Freddie says, no. All right, we're on to the next caller. You know, yeah, I think it was unfortunate what happened. If that's the direction that the call was going to go in, I think this Gus Renegade should have let Freddie know up front. You know, I've got, you know, just so you know, I've got some critical things that I want to talk to you about your thoughts on racism. You know, rather than having Freddie believing that he's being called in as a guest because he has stood up for racism in his life a lot, which he has. He stood up against it. Not only in the lawsuits surrounding his job, but you know in his everyday interactions with the FMK Todai and such, and all of his YouTube videos that are anti-racism. I think Freddie really got a bum deal with this interview, and he was excited about it. I know, on the weekend, you know, he was talking to me about how this interview was up and coming. He was excited about it, so you know, I felt bad that this is the way that it went.
Yeah, it just seemed to me like, in a way, Freddie was ambushed by it. He wasn't expecting it to go that way, and then not only that, but then after he had left the show, then Gus continued to imply that Freddie made racist remarks in his video, which he never did, and he just continued on with that, and then allowed his callers to call in and continue not only accusing Freddie of racism, but putting words in Freddie's mouth that Freddie never said, and also making racist comments about Asian people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, to me it just looked like it was kind of an underhanded thing that was going on, where from my perspective, it looked like the whole reason that Freddie was asked on the show was just so that Gus could call him a racist without actually saying it, and call him out on something that had nothing to do with race to begin with.
Yeah.
And that's really unfortunate. And it's, you know, I mean, you have cultural sensitivity, and then you have this hypersensitivity, and some people just can't find that balance, and it seems to me like Gus didn't find that balance. Like, he doesn't have that balance. It's like he's got this hypersensitivity that he's constantly on, without actually having any kind of balance about whether or not, you know, being able to look at things objectively and say, is that really racism?
Right.
You know, if he had come right out and said something like, you know, the N-word or something like that, you know, or some other racial slur against black people, then that would have been one thing, you know. But he wasn't making any kind of racial slur, you know.
If anything, it's the opposite with Freddie,
it was completely the opposite to me, and he was, you know, talking about trying to praise, you know, what he felt, you know, was a good education. You know, he was talking about the importance of education, you know, and he was talking about the importance of having, you know, intellect, not just having a strong body and being able to physically do things that other people can't do, whatever. It's also about having an intellectual ability as well, being able to say, yes, I'm educated, You know, yes, I can speak with a university professor as well as I could with somebody that just got out of high school, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a big difference in what he was talking about and what Gus implied that he was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, so I think that's what we wanted to say. We wanted to put that out there as our feedback, because we weren't live on the call last night when it happened, so we couldn't call in ourselves, but listening to it afterwards, we felt Freddie did get a pretty bum deal out of this interview. And I think, you know, if it's too bad, because obviously the show itself revolves around this challenge that we live in, this context where there is racism, and you had an opportunity to hear some of the things that Freddie might have been able to talk about, and I think they missed a lot of the good stuff that Freddie had to offer by trying to set up this
Ambush.
ambush.
Yeah. Yeah.